It's October 25th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to Qatar. Ahead of the 50th anniversary of South Korea-Qatar diplomatic relations next year, the South Korean leader will seek to deepen cooperation in defense, culture, and newly emerging industries. His first stop in Doha was the opening ceremony of a Korean-style garden. Israeli military forces say they eliminated Hamas divers attempting to enter one of their evacuated southern communities by sea on Tuesday. Local reports say talks over the release of more hostages are advancing, but there's no major development yet. Investigations are underway regarding 4 North Koreans who crossed the inter-Korean maritime border on Tuesday. South Korean authorities are looking into whether or not their intention to defect to the South is genuine. President Yoon Suk-yeol's visit to Riyadh ended with his participation in the Future Investment Initiative. And at the last event of his 4-day state visit to Riyadh, the Saudi Crown Prince tagged along to show his support. Our Kim Do-yeon searches us off.
At this year's Future Investment Initiative, dubbed the Davos in the Desert in Riyadh, President Yoon Suk-yeol appeared as a special guest on Tuesday, walking in with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. There, President Yoon used the stage to promote South Korea as a reliable investment to the participants, made up of 6,000 global business and finance leaders, including the CEOs of JP Morgan and Citigroup.
대한민국의 근면과 신뢰를 확인한 사우디 등 중동 국가들은 더 많은 공사를 맡겼으며 이는 부존 자원도 별다른 기술도 없었던 대한민국이 한강의 기적을 일구어 나가는 출발점이 됐습니다.
He also explained that while South Korea started with infrastructure construction in the Middle East, it's now leading in new technologies, including batteries, semiconductors, and EVs. The keynote speech was followed by an interview session with Scott Snyder, a director for the program on U.S.-Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations think tank. While answering questions on bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia, the South Korean president said mutual trust was one of the driving forces behind enhanced cooperation.
그동안 한국은 다른 선진 국가들이 오랜 세월 이룩한 그 산업화를 단기간에 압축해서 성장을 이뤄냈기 때문에 이러한 경험을 사우디와 공유해서 사우디가 추진하고 있는 이 첨단 산업화가 빠른 속도로 이루어질 수 있도록 협력의 폭을 확대할 것입니다.
He also emphasized that people-to-people exchanges will play an important role in keeping the momentum going for the bilateral relations. In the audience, bin Salman listened to the whole interview and showed support for President Yoon. In fact, according to the top office, the Saudi Crown Prince made a surprise visit to the guest house to meet Yoon before the FII and spoke candidly for around 20 minutes, sharing hopes that discussions during the state visit will yield results. He then drove President Yoon to the venue.
While heading to the FII venue, the Saudi Crown Prince said that he hopes next time Yoon visits, the two can be in a Hyundai electric car produced in Saudi Arabia.
As this was the last event of President Yoon's 4-day state visit to Riyadh, afterward, the two said a long goodbye to each other. According to the top office, the two enjoy a great relationship, and the meeting is a sign of a new chapter in Seoul-Riyadh cooperation. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Yoon began the second part of his Middle East diplomacy tour, traveling to Qatar on Tuesday. Well, he'll be looking to ramp up bilateral cooperation in a variety of future industries. And ahead of his summit talks with the Qatari leader on Wednesday, our Oh Soo-young fills us in on what to expect.
President Yoon Suk-yeol will seek to expand Seoul's relations with Doha beyond energy and construction to new emerging industries and ramp up cultural exchanges as they look to elevate their relations upon 50 years of bilateral ties next year. Landing in Doha on Tuesday, President Yoon became the first South Korean leader to make an official state visit to Qatar, continuing his Middle East diplomacy this week. Ahead of his summit on Wednesday with Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Yoon told a local media outlet that over the past half-century, South Korea and Qatar worked and prospered together, especially in the energy and construction sectors. He noted how Qatar is South Korea's second-largest supplier of liquefied natural gas, greatly contributing to its energy security, while South Korean firms have participated in numerous construction projects in Qatar, including the Lusail Expressway and the iconic National Museum of Qatar. However, Yoon said as Seoul explores ways to participate in Qatar's National Vision 2030, the two countries will seek to broaden the scope of cooperation centred on energy and construction to all areas, including investment, defence industry, farming, culture and interpersonal exchanges, so that people of both countries can enjoy more practical benefits. Upon his arrival in Doha Tuesday, Yoon attended the opening of the Korean Pavilion at the Doha International Horticultural Expo, showcasing a Korean-style garden along with the country's smart farm and agricultural technology.
The governments of both countries also plan to revise the Smart Farm Cooperation MOU on the occasion of this state visit and systematically promote specific cooperation projects such as the creation of a smart farm technology complex.
Following the Leaders' Summit on Wednesday, the South Korean president will attend a business forum with some 300 corporate leaders from both sides to encourage investment and collaboration in energy sectors like LNG and renewables, advanced technologies, health and cultural content. He will also speak with young Qataris, paying a visit to Education City, home to some of the world's leading institutes, startup incubators and technology parks, promoting collaborations with South Korea going forward in future industries. Yoon, Arirang News, Doha.
Israel says it killed Hamas divers who were trying to infiltrate Israel from the Gaza Strip via DC. Meanwhile, the U.S. once again clarified that it does not want any conflict with Iran. Lee Seung-ja has more.
According to Israeli media outlets, a number of Hamas divers were killed on Tuesday when they tried to infiltrate Israel from Gaza via the sea. Israel Defense Forces say at least 6 divers were killed, although the exact number has not been confirmed. Reports say Israel's Navy forces spotted the group entering the sea from a tunnel and opened fire at the divers, killing them. Meanwhile, the UN agency responsible for Palestinian refugees warned it cannot continue to bring in more humanitarian aid into Gaza without more fuel being supplied. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in Near East said Tuesday that if more fuel isn't delivered to the war-torn region, it will be forced to halt humanitarian operations by Wednesday night. Israeli Daily Haaretz reported on Tuesday that negotiations for the release of a large number of hostages are underway after Hamas released 2 elderly Israelis earlier this week and 2 Americans last week. According to sources familiar with the negotiations, Qatar, Egypt, and other countries are negotiating with Hamas over the release of multiple hostages. The Daily says Hamas could ask for a number of things in exchange, such as more humanitarian aid, including fuel. And the White House also on Tuesday warned against a full ceasefire in Gaza, saying it would only benefit Hamas, but humanitarian pauses in the region should be considered to let aid in. U.S. President Joe Biden said the day before that talk about any ceasefire could start only once all of the more than 200 hostages taken by Hamas were released. And with concerns that Iran could get involved in the armed conflict, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the UN that while Washington does not seek any conflict with Tehran, it would act swiftly and decisively if Iran or its proxies attack U.S. personnel anywhere.
The United States does not seek conflict with Iran. We do not want this war to widen. But if Iran or its proxies attack U.S. personnel anywhere, make no mistake, we will defend our people, we will defend our security swiftly and decisively.
The comments came as Blinken spoke to the 15-member UN Security Council amid international fears the conflict could spill over into a wider war and draw in other militant groups like Hezbollah. Lee Seung-ja, Arirang News.
Two more hostages were released by Hamas on Monday, and Israel's Haaretz reported hours ago that talks with Hamas on freeing more Gaza hostages are actively ongoing, but still no breakthrough yet. For more on this, we are joined by Professor Austin J. Nuppy this morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Countries, including Qatar and Egypt, are really hoping to a deal can be reached in the coming days for more hostages being freed. But why are hostages negotiations not going so smoothly?
That's a great question. It's actually a quite complex process. The United States and its European partners have to work through intermediaries in Doha, Qatar, and also Cairo, Egypt, in order to negotiate directly with Hamas. And so it involves negotiating with intermediaries in the midst of an ongoing conflict where there is extreme need for humanitarian assistance, relief in fuel and water and medical supplies. And so it is a political negotiation during an ongoing war.
Right, it is indeed a very complex issue. But the good thing is convoys of trucks, carrying necessities for civilians have entered Gaza from Egypt. But UN has long warned that it's not nearly enough for civilians there. Then what is it that the civilians need the most at the moment? Is it fuel?
That's a great question. So we have evidence in the last 12 hours that 8 trucks had crossed the Rafah crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, delivering food, water, and medicine. Now, in the last 24 hours, there's been something like 34,000 liters of fuel. That includes diesel, benzene, and cooking gas. And so there's a variety of needs to hospital generators, to desalinating water, water treatment, cooking. Hospital operating rooms all require electricity generated from fuel, both diesel and otherwise. And so it's an immediate humanitarian interest to supply this fuel, despite the fact that the fuel deliveries in the last day only can supply hospitals and ambulances for less than 24 hours of time.
Definitely. Professor Nuppy, there are also reports that the release of hostages would likely complicate Israel's ground assault. How is it a dilemma for Israel?
It's a strategic dilemma on a number of fronts. We have reason to believe that the United States is negotiating with the Netanyahu coalition to delay the ground assault into Gaza, and the hostage negotiations are one part of that. Of course, it's very difficult to fight an insurgency operation in a dense urban environment like Gaza. It's perhaps the most densely populated urban environment on Earth. And when you have something like 218 or 220 hostages unaccounted for, it's difficult to be able to identify militants and pursue those targets without putting civilians in harm's way, both hostages and Palestinian civilians.
Right. There should be no more sacrifice, especially among the civilians. And is it safe to say that Hamas and other rebel groups are, I'm afraid, maybe taking advantage of these hostages?
Well, certainly. We know that it's a violation of international humanitarian law to take hostages, and yet it can be in the short-term tactical interests of militant groups to use civilians as negotiating chips in terms of diplomacy on the one hand, and also as human shields on the other. And so despite the fact that it's an immoral and illegal strategy, it's quite effective, especially when you have conflicts between powerful militaries like the Israeli Defense Forces and relatively under-equipped militant groups like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other groups.
Right. In the meantime, though, U.S. President Joe Biden has long insisted that there should be no ceasefire in the war because he's afraid that ceasefire would favor Hamas. Now, does such a statement from Washington mean a ceasefire is unlikely? What do you think?
It's uncertain. It's actually hard to tell. I think the Biden administration is signaling to its allies one thing and signaling to the Netanyahu government another thing. And so the U.S. is publicly signaling support for Israel in terms of saying that a ceasefire would benefit militant groups. On the other hand, it's using private diplomatic channels to urge a temporary ceasefire at the very least to allow humanitarian evacuation from northern Gaza in particular. And so public U.S. diplomacy is sending one message and private diplomatic channels are pursuing different avenues.
Right. Washington has long pursued that there should be no ceasefire. But how can that last? Because the war has been ongoing for nearly a month, over 3 weeks now. Then how can the push from the Biden administration really stop the ceasefire?
Well, it's going to involve regional players, not only the United States, European partners. It's going to involve Lebanon, Jordan, and most importantly, Egypt. And so any decision or negotiation over a ceasefire is going to involve private diplomacy with the Netanyahu wartime coalition. It's also going to involve diplomatic negotiations with Hamas through intermediaries in Qatar and Egypt. And it's going to involve direct diplomacy with the Egyptian government. And so it's difficult to tell when that ceasefire may go into effect, given that it is a multilateral form of diplomacy among at least 5 or 6 key stakeholders.
Definitely. Thanks so much for your insight this morning and for joining us all the way from Utah.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.
On Tuesday, China officially dismissed its defense minister Li Shangfu, who disappeared from public view after the China-Africa Peace and Security Forum about 2 months ago. Beijing is yet to reveal the reason for Li's dismissal nor name his replacement. While Li had been sanctioned by the U.S. in 2018 for illegal arms purchases from Russia, Chinese President Xi Jinping appointed him as the defense minister in March this year. U.S. Defense Department spokesperson Patrick Ryder mentioned ongoing efforts by both nations' leaders to foster open dialogue regarding Li's dismissal, with the view that it may potentially signal improved U.S.-China relations ahead of China's top diplomat Wang Yi's visit to the U.S. on Thursday. Over in Russia, the Kremlin on Tuesday dismissed rumors that Russian President Vladimir Putin had suffered a cardiac arrest. Russian authorities released pictures apparently taken on the same day, showing Putin and Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov in a meeting. The denial followed posts that emerged on the Telegram messaging app on Sunday that Putin had suffered a cardiac arrest and that the Russian president was very ill and unlikely to survive, with all official meetings being conducted by a body double. Russian officials called the rumors an absurd hoax and said everything is fine with the president. The Telegram channel General SVR has made a number of claims about President Putin's health in the past, including saying he has cancer. Investigations into the 4 North Koreans who crossed the inter-Korean maritime border on Tuesday are now underway to see if their intention to defect is genuine. In the meantime, though, the South Korean military is facing criticism over surveillance of the northern limit line area. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung reports.
4 suspected North Korean defectors have reportedly been found in a small wooden boat in waters east of Sokcho, Gangwon-do province. According to a government official on Tuesday, they had expressed their intentions to defect. South Korean military authorities have confirmed that the suspected defectors have been detained after the movements were tracked.
A small wooden boat, believed to have come from North Korea, was spotted and tracked using coastal surveillance equipment.
A JCS official said at around 4 a.m., the military dispatched ships and maritime patrol aircraft near the northern limit line after spotting unusual movement from the north. At around 5:30 a.m., an army radar detected an object moving toward the south steadily at a very low speed. An hour later, the military used a thermal observation device to track the boat, which was moving diagonally towards Sokcho. A fishing boat from South Korea had also spotted the boat in waters around 11 kilometers east of Sokcho and reported it to the Coast Guard. Questions are being raised as to why the military could not spot the crossing of the NLL. A JCS official explained that detecting such crossovers is difficult as the NLL in the EC is over 400 kilometers long. The official also reassured that the military has been monitoring the boat closely after being detected on its surveillance equipment, and added that they have been cooperating closely with the Coast Guard and the Navy. A similar event happened 4 years ago when 4 North Korean fishermen defected to South Korea's Samcheok port in the EC and were forcibly repatriated to the north by the Moon administration. Last May, North Korean residents defected by crossing the NLL in the West Sea. The government is reportedly confirming whether the intentions of Tuesday's defectors are genuine. Defectors undergo an interrogation conducted by a joint investigation team consisting of the military, police, intelligence authorities, and the Unification Ministry. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Seong Kim, and we now turn over to stories from around the world. Starting with the US, where the Republican Congressman Tom Emmer has dropped out from his bid to be the House Speaker just hours after he received his party's nomination. Emmer won the Speaker nomination following 5 rounds of secret ballots on Tuesday, but the congressman from Minnesota failed to win Republican support on the House floor amid harsh criticism from former President Donald Trump. It is the Republican Party's third failed attempt to elect their House Speaker, following attempts by Steve Scalise of Louisiana and Jim Jordan of Ohio. With concerns over the government shutdown looming, House GOP Conference Chair Elise Stefanik confirmed that 6 Republicans are now running for Speaker in the 4th try. Staying in the US, dozens of states are suing Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, over youth addiction to social media. In a joint lawsuit filed by 33 states on Tuesday in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California, Meta was alleged to have harmed young people's mental health by misleading them and using addictive features. A further 8 states and Washington, D.C. filed separate lawsuits. The lawsuits come after a 2-year investigation following Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen revealing that Meta deliberately exploited young users' vulnerabilities for profit by providing addictive features targeting children. 2 cargo ships have collided in the North Sea off the coast of Germany, leaving 1 crew member dead and 4 missing. 2 of the 7 crew aboard the British-flagged freighter Verity, which collided with the Bahamian Polsey at around 5 a.m. local time on Tuesday morning, have been rescued. According to the German Coast Guard, rescue efforts are continuing with divers searching the sunken Verity for signs of life. The Verity was en route to the UK from Bremen, Germany, with a cargo of steel when it collided with Polsey, a ship that was en route from Hamburg to La Coruña in Spain. 1 of the 22 people on board the Polsey were injured. A superfog near the U.S. city of New Orleans has caused a crash of more than 150 vehicles. The pileup on Interstate 55 on Monday has left at least 7 dead. Thick fog and smoke from marsh fires caused a dense superfog, impairing visibility for drivers commuting. Authorities clearing up the wreckage on the highway said a further 25 people were injured, while warning that the death toll could rise.
Good morning. Brace yourselves for another misty morning drive. However, the skies are poised to clear up and bask us in sunshine. Also be prepared for some wild temperature swings again, and especially Uiseong, Korea's garlic capital in Gyeongsang-Pukdo province, which is set to experience a swift transition from early winter chill to a milder afternoon. In central regions and Chungcheongdo province, the levels might spike higher than their usual morning and evening standards. But the rest of the country, fortunately, should be able to breathe easy today. The south is in for a treat under sunny skies with plenty of autumn warmth. Daegu, Gwangju, Busan hitting highs of 23 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Highs in Seoul will be about 3 degrees warmer today at a cozy 22 degrees Celsius. We are eyeing some rain creeping into the forecast for central regions and Jeollado provinces starting late tomorrow afternoon, then tapering off by Friday at dawn. Then come Friday, eastern regions will have a rainy day. Well, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.